Now, this is an issue that I feel has been consuming me recently. Those of you that know me will probably be utterly sick of hearing me rant about this, so to these people, I apologize, but I'm about to do it all over again. Uh, I'm going to treat this as a bit of therapy, though. I'm going to get it all out of my system, and then I'll never moan about it again, I promise. So, what I'd like to talk about is my beef with the hamburger menu. See what I did there? Rather than this being just a 15-minute long rant, though, I'm going to provide some tips as to how you can avoid falling into the hamburger trap. I'll also share some really good examples from around the web of mobile first responsive navigation, so try and stick with me if you can. So, who am I? Well, my name is Chris Myhill. I've been a UX designer for about 7 years or so, and over this time, I've seen the web change in a number of ways. The biggest one of those changes is undoubtedly the shift to responsive web design, and with it, a bunch of ways which we have to change our process to interaction design, especially when it comes to mobile. Now, this is going to be a slightly controversial one, and I appreciate that not everyone's going to share my views on this, so please don't throw rocks or swear words at me. I'm just giving my opinion, so I'd like to caveat by saying that there are sometimes genuine uses for hamburger menus. Just my opinions, and I'd love to debate it on Twitter or whatever. Now that awkwardness is over, I'd like to talk to you about fast food. Specifically fast food in Queenstown, New Zealand. Now, I was lucky enough to visit New Zealand earlier this year, and one of the stops that everyone on the planet seemed to recommend was this place called Fergburger. So, why not? I thought. I popped over to the restaurant, and this is what I was confronted with: a giant line stretching out the shop, round the corner, into the horizon. It was mad. People were going absolutely bananas for these burgers. So, therefore, logic would dictate that they must be worth it, right? So I joined the line for literally 45 minutes and finally got my hands on one of those burgers. And the burger was fine. It wasn't especially wonderful, it was okay, a bit greasy, and it certainly wasn't worth the 45-minute line. What it did do was make me feel sick as a dog afterwards. So on the upside, it gave me some time to put these slides together. But I wish I'd gotten something else for lunch. So, Chris, you ask me, why are you telling me this incredibly pointless anecdote? Well, the moral of this story is that sometimes you shouldn't follow the crowd. It made me think that just because everybody else was lining up for these burgers, they were probably doing so because, like me, they were told to. The burger might not actually be worth it. And this brings me on to the internet. Now, the responsive web is kind of a big deal. We've gotten to the point where it's no longer a nice to have to make your website responsive, it's a necessity. If your business or brand is going to be taken seriously online, it needs to be responsive and it needs to be mobile optimized. During the shift to a more responsive web, we've seen a lot of design patterns and best practices emerge. Some have been awesome, and others not so much. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the hamburger menu, and from what I'm aware, it's been around for donkey's years. Apparently, the first known use was in some sort of printer software for Cisco or something. I'm not 100% sure, but I do know that this is the first ever photographed sighting of the hamburger menu in the wild, so this isn't exactly a new concept. This is the interpretation that you're probably more used to: a little icon in the top left or right of a screen that the user can click to unfurl a big list of navigation options for the website. Wonderful. Or is it? I have some issues with the hamburger menu. My first issue is that it's a barrier to content discovery. Users who arrive on your site for the first time should be able to scan the contents of your navigation immediately. Having your nav items always on show right away helps the user to understand what your website's all about. It also gives them an earlier idea about whether or not it's right for them. If the whole contents of your site are hidden, it requires a conscious effort from the user to see what's inside, and people have pretty short attention spans. The 5-second rule is a really important guideline. It's the idea that after landing on your website, a user usually gives it about 5 seconds to decide whether or not they've made the right choice. Hiding the whole contents of your navigation can risk losing people because your first impression is important and your navigation forms part of that first impression. It also slows down the navigation process. Now, having a hamburger menu means that an extra tap is needed to get around your site. It might only add a few seconds, but if you're creating a service where people are likely to use the navigation several times, it could be a bit of an issue. A social media website, for instance, will involve people doing the same actions many times. By repeatedly using a hamburger menu, you're causing unnecessary inconvenience. The design pattern also requires knowledge of a symbol that not everyone understands. In spite of how common it is, many internet users still don't know what the hell a hamburger symbol actually means. In our UX design bubbles, we often take the knowledge of that for granted. If a user doesn't know what this symbol means, you could have a usability issue on your hands. And my biggest beef is that it encourages bad information architecture. The limitations of mobile force us to make difficult calls. When you've only got enough space to show a few things on the screen, we really need to think about and prioritize what's important. The hamburger menu removes this constraint and it opens the floodgates for shitty IA. It becomes far too tempting for people to just add one more thing, because technically there's nothing stopping us. With the navigation hidden under a hamburger menu, it can be as long as you want it to be. There's no incentive to consolidate or prioritize your navigation. This often results in navigation getting out of control at both mobile and desktop. The problem that we're facing right now is that the hamburger menu has become so common on the mobile web that to the uninformed, it's generally thought of as a best practice, that because someone else does it, we should be doing it too. I can't tell you the amount of times I've sat in meeting rooms with clients and web teams only to hear, oh, let's use a hamburger menu because that's the best practice. The reality is that hamburger menus aren't the best practice, they're the common practice. And it is easy to miss the difference here, but there is a big difference. We're getting fat on hamburger menus, and that's a photo of me being a bit fat because I ate too many burgers. It's not a photo I'm proud of, but I feel like it's appropriate given the situation. So, how do we come up with better mobile navigation? Well, it all starts with information architecture, specifically mobile first information architecture. I'd like to share an example with you that I've been working on recently. This is for a non-disclosed museum website that I've anonymized so I don't embarrass anyone. But this is the situation that we started with when we began working with the client. So you'll see that we've got our mobile hamburger menu there in the top right hand corner. I'll tap that, and then this list of navigation options flies open. Now, as you can see, there's a whole load of them, and that makes it really hard to scan through and actually choose what you want to do. On top of that, it's not exposed to the user up front. You have to consciously tap the hamburger menu to see any of that. Now let's see that interpreted as a sitemap. So here's our information architecture for the non-disclosed museum website. You see we've got far too many sections and they're all very lengthy and wordy. It's quite hard to actually pinpoint any specific piece of content or functionality here. So what can we do to improve this? Well, we can do some user testing, which we did, but the key thing is that there are some refinements we can make to make this navigation a lot more mobile friendly. So can we let go of the words? Well, yes we can. You can see here that I've dropped a lot of the text off of the navigation. The meaning of these sections is still really apparent from the single word, but just reducing the amount of text really just helps users scan the navigation bar. What else can we do? Can we consolidate? Well, we can do that too. So we can start merging some of the sections that have a bit of an overlap. There were previously different top-level sections for the museum event pages and the music event pages. These have been combined into one section called What's On. Likewise, different ways to support the museum, such as volunteering and donating, have been combined into one section called Support Us. It makes sense. What else can we do? Can we start to prioritize? Are all of the top level sections in our navigation genuinely top level? Can some of them be deprioritized? Can they become secondary links in a footer or similar? Well, it turns out that visiting the museum, attending an event, or shopping are much more important user goals than learning about the history of the museum or getting teacher resources, for instance. That's not to say that the content shouldn't exist on the site, it just means that it doesn't necessarily have to be presented with the same weight as those first three important things. So what we've done is split the first three off into the top navigation and the second three into a secondary footer navigation. Ultimately, what this allows us to do is go from having a really long, horrid hamburger menu on the left to having a much more concise, mobile-friendly navigation like we got on the right there. You can see that the free top-level sections, visit, what's on, and shop, can be presented as links even on the mobile breakpoint, which means that the users can quickly get to those key actions, and it's just really easy to scan. Needless to say, this tested really well, and this is what's going to be launched in the redesign. So enough of my uninteresting work. Let's talk about some awesome examples of mobile-first navigation from around the web. So The Guardian do this really, really well. They use what I like to call a greedy menu technique. This is where they arrange their navigation from left to right in order of importance. So you'll see that world, politics, and sport have been moved to the left because people are more likely, I imagine, to access this content. And then on your mobile breakpoint, you see as many links as you can fit on the screen with an all link to reveal the rest of them. This is a really good example of prioritization and just showing what you do have the space to show. Bonus points to The Guardian as well, because if you swipe left or right on mobile, you can access the remainder of the navigation. Just a little added extra there. The BBC do a similar thing really well. Even on the mobile breakpoint, you're able to see links to news and sport, two of the most popular reasons that a user would visit the BBC's website. It's just a really good example of utilizing the space you have available and not just immediately resorting to a hamburger menu. ClearLeft get massive props for having an information architecture that's lean and concise enough that they don't even need to change it at the mobile breakpoint. The navigation is punchy enough that even on mobile, you can just display it all on one row. Really simple, really easy, and it's just super consistent. The WWF do use a hamburger menu, but their two most important calls to action, which are donate and adopt, are highlighted and broken out of the hamburger menu, so they're within easy reach. So using a hamburger menu, but still compromising and doing something slightly better. Gov.uk have to be in here because they have to be in every good web design presentation because they're so awesome. Sorry, I'm brown-nosing the UK government, but hey. Gov.uk is based entirely around search. That is the information architecture. Therefore, because they don't need to have any kind of complex tree-like navigation structure, all you need is a search bar, and this can be presented completely consistently on mobile, tablet, or desktop. So this is really awesome. It's super consistent. It's super simple. Just in terms of like a really quick and dirty solution to not using a hamburger menu, this is an example from Luke Jackson for a greedy navigation that you can quickly add to your website. So here you can see that your navigation items are ordered from left to right. And as you resize the screen, we show as many items as we can afford to show. So again, we are using a hamburger menu, but it's just a much more graceful solution than immediately chucking everything into one hidden menu. So that's my rant, that's my solution. I hope this is useful to you, and I'd love to debate this online. I blog and rant for Just UX Design. You can find me at justuxdesign.com, or you can get me on the Twitters at JustUXDesign. I'd love to chat with you, and cheers.